Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji. Welcome to the next live session of Avid Online. And for those who are joining us for the first time, a special welcome to you. Please refer to the chat box for more information on Avid Learning and our platform. We use the extraordinary circumstances 2020 brought upon us to transition online. Our digital further learning campaign, Avid Online, was launched on April 1st and is now 11 months young. And since then, we have curated and presented close to 240 programs. As we work towards going back to our own normal, and we are committed to continuing our support to the arts, maintain our connections with the creative communities, and facilitate learning and continuous dialogue with our audiences. So that whether we continue online, transition to physical events, or a hybrid mix of both, we stay true to our mantra, as always, that learning never stops. To mark International Women's Day 2021, Art Fervor and Avid Learning present Female Agency in Art, a session that celebrates the significant role women have played and continue to play in Indian art, arts engagement, and arts patronage. This program is the second of the two celebrating this important Remembrance Day. At Avid, we strive to celebrate women and their significant impact across the arts. To kick off the session, we have a most respected voice joining us to deliver insightful remarks on the historic trajectory and the growing importance of women artists in India and beyond. We are honored to have writer and historian Professor Partha Mittal. Please find more information about him in the chat box. It should have also been emailed to you earlier. After hearing from Professor, our session with equally impressive panel will begin featuring artist and program manager of the Students Biennale, KBF 2021, Faiza Hasan, curator and co-founder, St+art India Foundation, Giulia Ambrogi, and art collector, philanthropist, and founder, Gujral Foundation Feroze Gujral, who will be in conversation with the founder and curator, Method Art Space Sahil Arora. For more about each of our speakers, please refer to the extremely impressive bios that have been posted in the chat section. This session will seek to highlight the champions and highlight and champion professionalism and the advancement of women in the business and wider fields and explore women's diverse contribution to the arts. We will discover how these extraordinary women have, through their activities as supporters or producers of art, challenged societal limitations and upended the status quo. Despite their various historical and geographical circumstances, these women have believed in the power of art and its ability to transcend boundaries, labels, and definitions. Please note the session will be about 75 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A, in which Sahil will be taking questions. So do keep posting them in the Q&A box throughout. On that note, thank you once again for tuning in. Over to you, Professor Partha, for your opening remarks, and then Sahil. Look forward to a fascinating session. Thank you.
Thank you, Asad, and thank you, Avid, for inviting me. I feel so privileged to address you all tonight. Monday was International Women's Day. Today, in celebration of that momentous event, I would like to begin by remembering my life partner, Swasti Mittal, who dedicated her life to organizing exploited women in the informal sector of the global economy. She inspired me to turn to women artists in India. So, why no great women artists until now? As the feminist writer Sheila Robotham says, women are hidden from history. In patriarchy, women had very little independence, with a few exceptions, of course. All great religions endeavored to keep women in their place and often in the home. Brahmin women not allowed to read the Vedas. Muslim men had to say talak 3 times to obtain divorce. Buddhist nuns are socially inferior. No women priests in Christianity. Of course, Eve was the original corrupter of men. So at no stage in life did women have a voice. Father, husband, and son spoke for them. Of course, wealth and status did mitigate this disadvantage. But let's turn to art. We notice that women have always helped in the production, such as Nathdwara or Kalighat, but they were not given the recognition and also were taken for granted. Then you have women's ritual art. Alpana, Rangoli, Kolam, considered part of traditional life, taken for granted again, but not given any status. So this is what we need to remember. Only perhaps a measure of independence was in Madhubani. Let's turn to the colonial period. English art education, imported fine and applied arts dichotomy came from the West. Artisan versus artist, fine and applied arts. In fact, even in England, until recently, women were sadly discouraged from doing painting and sculpture at art schools. And in fact, Barbara Hepworth had problems. Of course, this had its impact in India. Women rarely in art schools until at least the 1930s. Let's take the year 1879. I've written about it. It is a great game changer because women entered the art scene. The annual winter exhibition in Calcutta that year included 25 women. Very interesting, mostly Bengali, of course, and housewives. Then you have many unsung women painters. Ravi Verma's sister Mangalabai was a painter, like the rest of his family, and helped him with the Baroda Commission, but no recognition at all in the canon. The young scholar Shilpi Das has been working on kind of recovering, restituting neglected Bengali women artists, and has published an important essay in the December 2020 issue of Marg. This is on Pratima Devi, an important figure at Shantiniketan, but forgotten. Let me lastly turn to women who made it. Shunani Devi, Tagore's niece, was a privileged public figure, but still controlled by men. Aisha, can I have the first image, please? Amrita Shegil, of course, unique in the history of art. You see, even Frida Kahlo was dependent on Diego Rivera. Natalia Goncharova accepted her subordinate status position within the modernist movement. But Amrita was her own person. Very, really, she couldn't care less. Partly, of course, her privileged social position, but she established her primacy in a man's world. Then you come to post-independence and women's art. Next, please. Meena Mukherjee. Powerful monumental sculptures, comparable with Ram Kinkar. And she led an unusual independent life, quite a rebel. Unfortunately, I could only get this one, which is not affected by copyright. It's a terrible problem. But you have seen her great sculptures at various sites in Delhi. Then there was, we mustn't forget the tragic Nasrin Mahmedi, a rare abstract artist in India. I'll now mention a few iconic artists, and they are my personal friends, I must say. Next, please. Mrinalini Mukherjee. Monumental sculpture, with hemp and very unconventional material. These were used for clothes and things, but she uses it on a real monumental scale, massive. To me, she is one of the most striking sculptors anywhere in the world. Next, please. Now, Apana Kaur is one of, again, very dear friends. I was very impressed with the deep social commitment and her spirituality. And she was, in fact, honored by the Hiroshima Museum. Then next, Nalini Malani deals with displacement, conflict, gender roles, memory, myth, and desire. Very, very powerful. And I think my final image next is Rekha Radvitya, again a friend, with her sort of rather interesting magic realism. She's moved on from her early work at the Slade. Of course, there are other important artists, and I mustn't forget them, Arpita Singh, Anupan Sood, with wonderful drawings, Gogi Sarojpal, etc. Now, also, let's think of Pakistan. Women artists Salima Hashmi, Nazish Ataullah, Sabak Hussain have blazed a trail with their radical critiques of women's oppression. Then you have very remarkable artist, younger generation, Shazia Sikandar in New York, very, very a person of her own. And of course, there are a number of Bangladeshi artists. I shall finally take women and patronage. I mean, the reason women were not in the picture, they had no independent income. They were very powerful within the family as matriarch, but not outside. But this sort of art scene changed dramatically with globalization and market economy. I suppose the end of the millennium, last millennium, 20th century. Women have come a long way. We must celebrate. They have moved from the margins to being business leaders. Major new initiatives have been started and headed by women. They're active patrons of note, entrepreneurs, very powerful in the art world. And that I'm thinking of Sunana Anand of Art Alive Gallery, Geeta Mehra of Shakshi Gallery, Shirin Gandhi of Kemul, Prescott Road, daughter of my dear friend Kehu Gandhi, Renu Modi of Gallery Spas, and of course, very important, Kiran Nadar, who founded an influential museum. And there are a few, but also famous Art India Fair, which I have visited a number of times, the wonderful, led by Jagdeep Jagpal, very impressive. Anita Dubey has led curating it, Kochi Biennale. I'm sorry, I have not been, but I'm told by everybody it's an amazing kind of site. And last not least, I can have to say, present panel of remarkable women whom we will hear very soon. They're doing great work on curation, art making, and facilitation. But I would say in conclusion, that these developments demonstrate that women are now an integral part of the entire art, what one could say, ecosystem. And I think the phrase, a bright future ahead. So let me end by reiterating my conviction that the 21st century is a century of and for women. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Mitter. And I'm going to, for this insightful presentation, I'm going to ask Sahil to just take over and get on with the panel discussion. Sahil? I
Thanks,
think
Asad. Um, and thank you, Professor Mitter, for the very enlightening background on the history of women in art. For those of you all who joined a little later, because I saw the number of participants go up, we have Feroze Gujral, Faiza Hasan, and Giulia on our panel. And to kind of pick up on where Professor Mitter left off with women coming, slightly late into the picture when it comes to patronage of the arts at the turn of the millennium. Feroze, any thoughts on that? Do you want to add a little bit about the early days of art patronage from a women's perspective and who some of the pioneers in the field were?
First, thank you, Dr. Mitter. That was a nice kind of recap. I think we need that for a lot of our listeners. Um, Thank you, Sai, for the question. I would like to just kind of put us a little bit in contemporary India context when it comes to patronage. I think India is very different to the rest of the world. People forget that we are a very ancient civilization, but a very young country. And I think this is the main kind of fault line between us talking about the West and us talking about South Asia. And in this civilization and country conversation comes the idea of, somebody like, based in India, practicing in India, we're only 70 years old. We don't have those kind of institutions. We don't have that kind of money. We don't have the kind of government support to all of this. So I will say that patronage is very young in India, but I think it's always been there, but not maybe in an organized sector of the arts. So, it's like tradition versus contemporary. So traditionally, we're used to say giving to the temple or giving to the poor. And in the contemporary world, we're used to saying, okay, we have now more avenues for giving. We need to preserve. We have a little more progress, more funding. We are more successful as a post first generation new Indian. So I think it's a different conversation in terms of patronage in South Asia. The other point was really to see supply and demand, and particularly to uh, female artists or women in the arts. I think nobody really looks at the question of supply, right? So, how many of us actually do art studies? How many of us actually do art management studies? How many of us are actually prolific art makers? I think the role of the woman is so unidimensional or not unidimensional, so kind of goddess like. We have all these arms that we have to feed. That being mother, businesswoman, wife, sister, daughter in law. So the subcontinent kind of has to be looked at very specifically and not in comparison to the West. And I'd like to just kind of put that out there because otherwise it always makes us look much the worse for it. Personally, I'm very excited with what we do in the arts because I feel there is a gap and we have a moment in time to actually fill that gap. I feel there are a lot of amazing people doing really good work in the arts. It's also a very large canvas. India is extremely large, both geographically and the number of people we have. So sometimes it looks like a little, but it's actually a lot of little things. And I think the history of India philanthropy comes definitely from, the monarchs, and then, of course, whether we had all the separate monarchs in South India, North India, and the East. Then you have kind of the Mughals for 800 years, and then you have the British. And I think I don't want to go into colonial, post-colonial conversations, but I do want to say that contemporary India, which is my kind of, zone of work and interest, is definitely beginning to respond. Unfortunately, we have such a vast amount of social economic troubles that it's not easy. Um, so I read something like Getty Foundation, Susan Unterberg, all these great uh, formats and institutional support in the West who give millions and billions of dollars to this emergency fund for art and culture. We in India personally have had to deal with migration labor moving, have had to deal with genuine cases of, starvation or genuine cases of people losing their jobs and not having a roof over their heads. So philanthropy in India, I think, is a bit skewed, less towards the arts, but I think we all also need to do the rest. So it's very hard to kind of come up with a kind of a good answer to the question of what has been the history of philanthropy in India. I think in the arts, it's a little more, what should I say, overshadowed by the rest. But I think it all whittles down to somewhere reaching some format of art, craft, some sort of, feeding some part of the arts. Even if it's just a family member actually helping the rest of the family keep that tradition alive. So I just wanted to put that out there first because I find that India conversations are also very hard. The last part of it is just national and public, and I have a great grouse against this. In India, the arts are still largely under the, what should I say, the force, the government force. Everything is nationalized. There are national museums and national schools of design and this and that, and there are national colleges, and that kind of, it's supposed to be, national is supposed to be meant for the people, but here national means government and public means the rest of us. And I feel that is where personally I find the problem begins and ends. It's like we don't have access to institutions. We don't have access as a patron to say, can I help better this institution? Can I have a patron circle that maybe funds upkeep or buying new work or just restoration projects, and that's the kind of the fourth element, which is very South Asia, a problem that South Asia faces. So for us, it's there's not much of a legacy to follow. There are, of course, the great names, but they've all been doing social philanthropy, and it's hard to follow a Tata or a Birla because in terms of the arts, they've been patrons, they've been builders, etc. But again, private enterprise without public or national support. So I'm not sure if that's a good answer, but it's a bit of a foundation to lay where we come in. And so it's a bit hard to answer what has been the past of this legacy of giving to the arts in India. Was that complicated and long?
No, it was, I think it's an interesting perspective when you look at India as one of the oldest nations, and to kind of put a lens on it and see that we are still in very nascent stages. I think it's an interesting perspective. Giulia, kind of picking up on what Feroze said about, the government kind of working with the institutional sector. As the founder of Start India, right, which is really about taking the arts to the streets, which isn't an easy task at all. How was it for you to kind of navigate, all the cobblestones on the way and to just make that happen? Like, do you resonate with what Feroze says, and how did that pan out?
I do resonate with what Feroze has said, and I think that as everything, almost there are the two faces of the same coin. When Feroze is saying, almost that there is not a manual, because again, since this sort of, philanthropy scheme is quite recent somehow, that means that, and of course it's not really institutionalized in the sense that, just to give you a sense, there is no creative industries recognized in India by the government. And unfortunately, many things, of course, needs to be sort of labeled or institutionalized, as much as I don't like it to institutionalize too much things. But in order to create that ecosystem, which also would then allow policies, would then allow, for instance, a taxation system for which, if you can invest in art, your taxes can be sort of, kind of help somehow, which is what happens, in America, for instance, right? It's not that the reason why there are so many great museums, so many great initiatives is because there is a very structured ecosystem that sort of trickles down from, the government and the institutions to the patrons and then to the public, right? So of course, that's a very clear manual and a clear structure to operate within, which is not the case in India. At the same time, I think that this is exactly the incredibly exciting moment, to be part of, because since there is no manual, actually, you can suggest one. And of course, that means that is much more difficult because you have to break the path, right? And you have to break through the path, which is not easy. It means that, like, I mean, persistence, patience, really like a sort of incredible resilience as well, like, you know, needs to be in place somehow. But I find that to be quite, I mean, as challenging as interesting as a process, right? Because over the time and over the years, like, we've been facing like many challenges, like with the government, first and foremost because we were proposing initially something that no one was really understanding, right? Like, in the sense that of course, like, India has a very, very old story also when it comes to street art. If you think of, you know, like all of the vernacular or indigenous art form that we'd rather see now, you know, like we'd rather see now gone on postcards or like, you know, on, you know, like canvases, but actually, I mean, it belongs to the walls, it belongs to public spaces, right? So I think that, of course, like, I mean, there has been a sensitivity, like, you know, in terms of contemporary urban art, which was already there because it's nothing that new, but the new form of it, of course, suscitated, especially in the big cities where all those traditions are lost somehow, suscitated like a lot of like doubts and concerns because, of course, the government is also like very scared all the times, like, of being responsible of whatever comes out in the streets. And in that sense, there is like, of course, many sort of like rigid kind of structures that comes into place, you know. So it's rather a don't than a do, even though, like, you know, it's for a public contribution. There is always like the fear that some sort of like revolutionary commentary can come up on a wall, and that would not be seen like in a good way. That's on the one side. On the other side, of course, is the bureaucracy, which is like really intricate, like really intricate, and actually in the bigger city is even like, you know, slower and intricate than in other cities. And I'm referring particularly also to Delhi. Of course, like Delhi being the capital poses like many more challenges at all levels, like, I mean, content-wise, logistic-wise, permission-wise. But then the good part, actually, the very good part is that over the years, this, like, I mean, every cities we've been working in has been kind of more and more open, because I think that, as I said, and as Feroze was saying, you know, India is like one of the oldest civilization of the world, and the impact and art in India has always had a very important role, even though before was rather you know, connected to religion or to the monarchy. But that happened like also in Italy. I'm from Italy, so of course I refer to that. I mean, Renaissance like didn't like, it wasn't absolutely like how can I say, like a free art movement, right? Like, I mean, the patronage was like either from, you know, the courts or from the Pope. So that has been happening all over the world and all over the ancient civilization, let's say. Coming back to the contemporary, I think that there is no manual. That's very hard, therefore, to sort of, you know, navigate into like a sort of like structure which is rigid, not really open, and of course, like, also has to deal with like many different matters, and art like sort of like comes at last. But I think that is moving quite well. And I think that that's also the reason why those conversations are like actually very important, because they connect, like, I mean, different players and different stakeholders. And I guess that now we should also like put like an accent on creative industries again, like how to sort of institutionalize ourselves a little bit in order not to create that sort of, you know, government and the others, but actually to activate like a different conversation within it. As I said again, and I want to stress on that, like, I think that exactly because there is no manual, one can really break through. And I guess that is just a matter of the urge that one feels of doing what we do, with all the difficulties that can bring along.
So, I mean, the framework is lacking, the manual doesn't exist, but I think there's work happening. Obviously, all three of our panelists are kind of working on that for some time now. Faiza, as you know, an artist, in addition to kind of your role as an administrator and a curator in the world of arts, Um, how does this impact you? And especially, I guess, more as an artist, do you see the lack of institutional funding or the framework something that trickles down to the creator level as well, outside of just the institutional side of things?
Um, I mean, I know this is not a unique position because we've seen over generations artists, sort of participating in building institutions, collectives, and sort of putting in the administrative labor, and having one foot in either ship. I do feel like it's a very useful position to be in, especially for sort of allowing these spaces to sort of grow. One of my reasons for saying so is because you kind of find a middle ground when you start, like, as an artist. Sometimes you do not understand um, the labor that goes into producing an arts or cultural space. And when you enter that realm, you realize that there are a lot of areas that one needs to negotiate. One would be an administrative area. One would be, like, say I've been associated with a not-for-profit organization, which then again has audit and other financial constraints. And then you have a curatorial team that has its own vision, and then there are artists, and then you have to kind of negotiate between uh, all these various stakeholders. And when you have some understanding from the point of view of a practitioner, and with the program that I've been associated with as well, I worked on ground for about 2 editions where I was part of the Young Curators program, and I worked on field. So there were some things that I could sort of anticipate in that way. When you then work alongside an administrative team or a finance team, and so on and so forth. And I also think that it is empowering for artists to also learn these things, which ideally should have been taught in art school. I mean, there are a lot of things that about our own work that we should be taught, but we're not. And I find it very empowering because to understand these things, because I think, working with collectives, building collectives, these are sustainable ways for artists to sort of continue and grow, their practices. And these skills, are useful because, and also I kind of feel like artists are also kind of stakeholders in some sense to sort of build these institutions and, be a part of them. So, yeah, it's been, yeah, there's been a lot to learn. Yeah.
And, I think this is for all of you, but kind of to narrow in on the role of women and the women's perspective on this, do you think it's harder to navigate through the institutional process because y'all are women? Or do you think men maybe get an unfair, stronger footing than y'all?
Should I answer?
I think all of y'all can answer. I'd love to hear all of y'all on this.
I think in India, particularly, this realm has been kind of left to the women. And I use the word left to the women largely. I'm not sure why, because when I'm in the West and I'm in a room full of, at the art fair in Basel, or you're at a great auction or anything, you're in a room full of gray-haired men dealing in millions and billions of dollars. And when you're in India, you're in a room full of women managing, just barely managing, whether they're gallerists or they're, curators, or they're people like us who are funding and creating platforms. And this is a strange phenomena, but at the same time, it's a very unique phenomena because I find South Asia is the only place that have had very strong female leaders, whether it's, Benazir Bhutto or Mrs. Gandhi or Vandra Naik. It's these very strong female leaders, whether it's, Jayalalitha or it's Mamta Banerjee. We have this very strong female power in South Asia. So actually, for me personally, it's almost like a good space to be in. It's a possible space. So I see personally myself within the arts in India in a kind of empowered platform. So I do realize female artists all over the world, are in very negligent numbers. The sales are very negligent. The prices for art are very low. But that's a global phenomena against female-male parity in terms of wage earning. But I think for women in the arts, it's also output. How prolific are female artists really? And I think that is an important question, because males kind of set on a path of a job or a profession, and they keep going, right? Every day they do this. This is their job. They're bread earners, they do it. Women, we tend to say, okay, now we're having children. Now my mother-in-law's sick. Now, I have to look after somebody else. I have to constantly divest time, energy, money, my skill set into many facets. So to go back to the original question, I do feel myself empowered in India in the arts, but it may be me coming from, of course, the side of philanthropy and patronage, which is a very privileged position. So yeah, I would say that from my point of view.
And sorry, Giulia, please.
No, go for it, Sahil.
No, I'd love to hear what you have on the subject.
No, I mean, I think that, I work in public spaces mostly, right? And at the same time, a lot with government. And I think that what I'm going to share is more anecdotes than other things. But, at the beginning, my colleagues, so the co-founder of St+art were the ones, going for permissions, right? With all the big boys and heads of the government, whatever bodies, we were dealing with. Of course, it was also because my understanding of India was much lesser. And I think that so far I also understand very little, because India is a continent. When we talk India, at times, now we are working a lot in Tamil Nadu, and it's so different, from the north, right? So India is a continent, it takes more than a life, I guess, to understand something, because it's so amazingly various and rich at all levels, right? So I'm still a neophyte, I would say. But at the beginning, of course, I was even more, right? So obviously they were going ahead. Then, for some strange reason, when we've done this project in a container yard in Delhi, I was dealing majorly, with Concord and the railways, because I was more able to explain the project, right? So as a matter of fact, I was there. And then we understood that actually this surprise of having a woman in a container yard where just men are, was quite a sort of, sort of determinant. It was shifting perception. And I think that the surprise effect was kind of helping us out also in getting permissions, in the sense that how do you change something which is perceived as natural? And I think that, in general, white men is perceived as natural. In India, of course, men are perceived as natural. What all is not, that is not natural, right? There is this thing of what? And just as a matter of fact, human beings try to hold on their privileges is something so basic. And the point is just that if there is an opening for others, whomever these others are, privilege may become lesser, right? So it's just a very basic sort of fundamental thing, which also then, when it comes to women, kind of unifies, I think, the world, with just the difference that in India, the complexities of those privileges are even more, right? So you have even more layers of complexities, so that, of course, as Feroze was saying, is much different talking from a privileged perspective as a woman that, of course, has had an education, has a support system, is recognized because of I don't know, a family surname, whatever that could be, right? Rather than, and in that sense, a woman can also have a step further than a man that actually belongs to a lower caste, right? So in that sense, in India, then many more dynamics are kind of coming into play, and makes the situation even more different, like difficult to a certain extent, right? But I think that, I mean, somewhere we should start, and I think that, you know, also like finding exactly like ourselves, perhaps in a room full of women talking art, it's great, because then, like, you know, somehow it subverts that, exactly that sort of economy that Feroze was talking about like in the West world, where men are also there, men are everywhere, and you can't do anything about it. So great that actually there is, like, you know, that sort of little revolution that perhaps also come from many different things, right? Of course, less money are in the Indian art system, and perhaps men are less interested in stepping into that game. So, you know, it's a give and take. But let's take the good parts, I would say. And very happy, in fact, like echoing like Feroze, very happy to be and to take those good parts, actually, and to sort of create a case to progressively, organically move further on this path, because that's the beauty of it, that when you sort of like cement on something which has happened for many different reasons, then you can actually build on it, right? So I think that, again, is a great opportunity that we have to organically build on like a community that actually goes beyond than just like being women, because, or women in the arts. So thank you for the title, but like of the conference. But I think that we are people in the agency of the art, and not women in the but yeah, like that's a little bit of a labeling that I think it's not really helping us as women, by the way. So yeah.
I agree. Makes us a minority, but
Yeah, like, I mean, it just like perpetrates that thing, right? And again, like, I think that like sort of generates this cascade effect, like this snowball effect, where then, you know, like then in the West you will be an Indian woman in the arts, right? So it kind of like, you know, then
it's true, Giulia. When you go to the West and you're invited to something, of course, in India, the great privilege for me, Asad, you'll be happy to know, they all think I'm a Parsi male. I get appointments, and all my mail says Mr. Feroze Gujral, and they're very happy to see me. And then I turn up for a meeting, and they're like, I'm sitting and waiting, and then I go up and say, I've been here 20 minutes, I'm going to be late. And they're like, yeah, you have to wait because Mr. Feroze is before you. And I'm like, okay.
no.
We have two things in common. They think I'm a Parsi male too. So yeah.
Amazing. Oh, great.
But it helps when you're abroad and they're happy to see an Indian woman or any woman from India, because it's, you know, we're a break to the white man with the white hair in a suit.
Yeah, no, that for sure. Like, and I mean, I think that, to be honest, like, has also helped me of being a white woman in India. I would never, you know, like hide that as a fact, because I think that there is that kind of allure somehow, you know, that is still, again, don't want to enter in the post-colonialism, like, you know, discourse, but there is like perhaps still a sort of allure. So you are kind of, oh, a white woman working in India, interesting, you know. And of course, like, I mean, yeah, it kind of plays that effect as well. But yes, like, I think that also, like, you know, I believe that it helps, like, being an Indian woman abroad. But, you know, I was also thinking of like being in Berlin in 2017, like, you know, in the BMW prize, which is one of the most relevant prizes that is here in Berlin for the arts. In 2017, like 4 women, none of them from the West, have won the prize. And you know, what has happened is that actually they have criticized, like with an open letter, exactly the fact that in order their art and the content of their art wasn't at all taken care of. They're just like they were minority of a minority. So the Venezuelan women artists like won the prize for women, you know, from, you know, like the south of the world winning the prize for the first time. So basically there was nothing at all about the art, and it was just about like them being women, and on top of that, not even from the West. And that becomes a narrative that I think it's really, really dangerous. That's
I
the thing,
agree.
because it's a media bubble, and it kind of defeats the purpose actually of like liberating minorities, actually kind of like restate even more, and yeah, I guess that's the moment we are in also when it comes to feminism. It's becoming a little bit rather a tokenism than something that really can make a change. So.
Do you think artists
And
are catching on to the feminism token
no,
sorry, Faiza.
sorry, I want to sort of pitch in, and my experience would be very different from either of Feroze's and Giulia's, and not to harp on the negatives, but I think I'm positioned very differently in terms of being an art worker and belonging to a larger hierarchy. And I kind of feel like uh, it is, I don't feel that I feel that's the same privilege being a woman a female art worker in that sense, because it's much more difficult because you're part of a larger hierarchy, and although you're doing a lot of things, you don't necessarily have the same access to decision making, although you're working off ground. And like on a daily basis, you have to learn to negotiate with people speaking to you in a very different way than they would to your male colleagues in the same position, and to even be taken seriously despite continuously putting in consistent work and gaining experience in what you're trying to do, and what you're trying to talk about. And I also, my work entails working on production sites in a year which does not have COVID. And production sites are the way I interpret, very masculine spaces, because you are working with you know your contractor and different kinds of people, contributing to say carpentry or, building your site and all of that. And it's like a large scale production all said and done. And these, I do feel like, are masculine spaces. Even as an artist, the sort of experiences that you have through art school, I do feel like uh, because of this difference in the worldview, perhaps, or an experience, I do feel like sometimes your experiences are sort of discredited because of this discrepancy in the worldview, essentially, like and the interpretation of the feminine, and how seriously that's taken as well. And so and I know these are like very common problems, but I kind of feel the need to reiterate it because these exist, and we have to still negotiate through them before you can say we've arrived at a space where things are more gender neutral.
I think that's a global problem.
Yes, absolutely, but I do think
Production is
yeah.
male, for example, so the male female question it's a big conversation. It's
Yes.
not resolved anywhere in the world. So I feel for you in that regard. Yes.
Faiza, as an artist, do you also think, not just you, but other female and women artists also face similar issues when approaching galleries? Like, do you think it's easier for a male artist to like walk in and or present their work and get biased towards them? And this, despite, like Feroze said, a large number of gallerists are women. Do you think that also kind of happens?
Uh, well, I mean, I've not really exhibited so much to have, an experience on this. I know there is still a sort of a representation gap, but having said that, I also do feel like, I'm also like thinking about, even art colleges are sort of spaces where, art is taught, and there are certain things where I personally feel like the change could, perhaps the dialogue could start there, like what I was insinuating earlier as well. And I know things are changing, there are dialogues happening, but one could perhaps start the conversation, and I suppose in art school, start making that space safer, start having these discussions there, and then that consequently starts reflecting also in galleries and stuff. I can't speak for galleries because I have very little experience on that front, But as an artist, I do know, I have had experiences where I I have said I have had an experience, and it was like literally discredited. And you know, like even campus, like just to give you an example, for 5 years I have struggled to sort of address issues of safety and harassment, and been denied help by the security because the security was sort of involved with this person. And the these kind of things, you know, like go a long way in sort of encouraging women, like just basic safety, you know, like acknowledging that somebody's having a problem, let's address it. These goes a long way in having more female artists and having safer spaces. And I think my larger contention with the art world is also that there are perpetrators who, and there's a lack of accountability where they continue to be given space and opportunities, and that kind of cuts down on the number of women coming into the art world in general, in whatever aspect you look at it, you know. So there are a lot of layers to this, and these discussions I feel like need to happen. And even in terms of like teaching art, you know, like I feel like there is, again, you know, a lot that can be done in terms of these conversations, the way art is looked at and all of that.
And I mean, that's obviously at a school side and
Yes,
and
absolutely.
education side of things, which
Yes.
is really key. But you know, kind of just to, I guess, jump forward for the artists who do make it right into galleries and get
Right.
representation and have their work put out there. Um, Feroze, I guess this one's a little bit for you, but do you think prices then kind of are also impacted, and maybe women get a little shortchanged? This is actually a question that someone in the audience sent out. But do you think women artists get shortchanged when it comes to the sales side of things and how their art is priced?
You know, like anything else, there is, and I'm trying to be very kind of non-political and non-feminist and kind of just be very practical. There is, like what I discussed at the very first thing, is actual output. You know, so when you work on something, yes, there are more male artists. Yes, the male artists put themselves out more. Yes, they do more publicity. They turn up at more events. They push harder. They do a lot more, because I think being male means you're a breadwinner for your family, for the girl you marry, for children, right? That very simple premise of being the breadwinner and the head of the household. So I think there is definitely a whole generation now, contemporary India, for example, of qualified women artists, of people who actually been to school for art, who are beginning to enter the art market. And this is our new generation of Faiza's age group, you know, 20s, 30s, late 20s, 30s, 40s. This is a new generation. So they are beginning to see themselves as career women in the arts. Now, it all stems from the beginning. When you say as a young girl, I'm going to be an artist, every mother says, great, be an artist, wait till you get married, right? But there is not this sense that, oh my God, you're a great artist, you're going to be a great artist, you're going to be world famous, I'm going to support you. Yes, I will say that to the daughter, but I will take all my funding and send my son to engineering college, right? So at the end of the day, it's more men are out there, more male artists approach us as a foundation, more male artists persist, more male artists do the press, do the PR, you know, they invest in it as a job proposition. I think that is changing now from some young artists, but a lot of the female artists have other priorities also, and they have young children. And no male artist is saying, oh, I'm going to stay home this year because I have two young children and I need to bring them up, right? He's expecting his wife to do it. Most often, the wife is also an artist. And you see her flower much later with less work and less energy and time, money, resources. Two people are in a household of artists, and the male is the one doing the big jobs and producing, you know, large works. And very often the woman kind of tends to step back or tends to give up. And that is that, you know, infraction point, which is really, really sad, um, which is changing, which is changing. Now women are saying, I am the artist. They're using the word. A lot of women, when they come to us, say, oh, you know, I do a bit of painting and a bit of sculpture, and you realize it's a lifetime work, but they don't say I'm the artist. Whereas a man will turn up and say, I'm an artist, here's my bio, look at all this, you know. He looks at it as a job. So I think a lot of that has to change within us too. It's not just the outside world, you know. So I feel, yes, there are more male artists, yes, they get better prices, yes, they're doing more work, but they see it as a job. And I feel a lot of the female artists do not. I hate to say it, but a lot of them do not, you know, yet. Does that answer something?
Yeah, definitely. Giulia, you know, kind of, I think Feroze shed some light on taking the work, putting it out there and doing it seriously when it comes to start and let's say the whole street art movement, right? I think there's an additional layer to that. It's not just creating art and going to a gallery, but it's also about saying, hey, I've gotten past that step where I'm taking it seriously, but now you're telling me to go out there and put my body in the streets for days at end to paint a 2-story mural, right? Which obviously comes with safety issues. It comes with issues of men latching at you or like passing lewd remarks and things like that. How do the female artists that you worked with from a street art perspective and a muralist perspective, like how do they tackle those questions and problems at home and even internally themselves?
I mean, let's start like in saying that again, it's no different like the street art like sector from any other, and not just like in the arts, but in general, where of course, like I mean, there are like much fewer women street artists than female street artists, like than male. Sorry. So let's start like by saying that now. If we want to go back like to in general, like, you know, the roots of the movement and saying that it started like actually like, you know, with graffiti. So, and it started as an illegal, you know, like phenomenon, which meant that like, you know, you go out in the night with your bodies usually. It's a kind of dangerous sort of situation. You can get caught by police. You can fall from, you know, like a wall that you are trying to climb, and so on and so forth, right? So, I mean, of course, like it also poses the kind of physicality of this art form, which indeed comes into play as well. It's most of the times also in the legal environment. It's quite of a demanding act. In the sense that really your body has to be sort of there, strong, you know, climb on scaffoldings, painting under the you know, like I mean under whatever weather, super hot, etc. So indeed there is also like a physical component that I would say that comes into the picture as well. I think that also like in general, like again, we are talking institutional structures, and when I'm saying institutional structures is again what is considered to be natural and what is not considered to be natural. So a woman on a scaffolding is definitely considered not to be that natural, and I think that women themselves a lot of time perhaps like, you know, don't even think of themselves in the possibility of doing something which is not kind of like absorbed and registered as something that can be natural, right? So there is like also an auto-discrimination, I think, that comes into the picture, unfortunately. And at the same time, of course, like, I mean, there are like also other cases which are like absolutely interesting, because as a matter of fact, I think that the point is that, again, I'm an artist, I'm not a woman. I want to do street art because I feel the urge of actually using my creativity and my expression like in the public. The consequence of it, I think, and Faiza, like, I mean, just like to actually sort of like connect with what you were saying before, is not all like flowers, like what I was like speaking before at all. Like, I mean, I'm also like in pre-COVID world, always on construction sites, most of the times also in very marginalized area. So, I mean, like, slums, or, you know, like, I mean, those kind of like contexts, let's say. And I think that in that sense, like, what is really interesting is the body of the woman in this context and how that can create a shift. That doesn't come, you know, like, I just like think that most of the times I understood later what I was going through, especially in the first years in India. I didn't understand it while I was going through it, because I was just like, yeah, I have to do it. I have to do it. Like, and I wasn't thinking how much it was impacting on myself, like how much actually energy was demanding from myself, how much, strength to a certain extent, right? Like of saying, it's so good, I'm going to make it also through this day. And okay, fine. Like, I mean, my colleagues are not really listening to me, perhaps. Like, I mean, it's a very different sort of behavior that, everyone establishes, but I'm going to make it, like, and just now, like, like, I understand really like what that meant, like, and really how much energy I had to spend in keeping my stances, like, somehow, and like respect myself in the way of saying, I'm not going to get stopped because, like, men are behaving with me in this way. I'm not gonna get stopped because there is like also a sort of sense of unsafety, or because I got arrested. And I think that it's a problem because perhaps at times I normalized it. I normalized the fact that like a man can be, like incredibly sort of, how can I say, open in his not just comments but gestures, and I just normalize it like with a sort of like a very how can I say, diplomatic but strong, like how can I say, comment. So that's also the case. The case is also that like when you are out there and you're doing like things that a lot of men also perceive as, oh, so that's like, I mean, an incredibly independent woman, therefore it's a woman of like, sort of how can I say, I mean, not strict, like sort of, behaviors. And so I can try on her, right? Because that's also the perception. But I think that that's the interesting part, is like when you put the women body out in the public and you make that as like, like a public, like kind of like exercise also in reintegrating like what usually is within domestic walls out there, and how that integration can, sort of like create possibly a difference. And I think that that's like, I mean, extremely relevant. And I also think that, as always, like it's a matter of creating a dimension which can be sort of, that can multiply itself, which means also that, like just 7 years ago, there were just two female street artists in India. Now there are like, I mean, I don't know how many, I don't want to count, but there are many, many more that are like there, because of course you start recognizing that there is a community out there, and there is a sense that, like kind of like set the basis of new conversations. So I think that in that sense, like, the public like dimension of what we do, it's kind of interesting also to sort of create those shifts in understanding dynamics.
Right. No, I think that's an interesting perspective. Faiza, kind of just shifting more, I think, again, to the creator side in you, but a lot of your early work kind of was, traditionally considered female forms, where you incorporated a lot of embroidery and things like that. But with your new recent works, how are you seeing that evolve? Are you like experimenting with different things? Like, where are you at this stage as a woman artist and the kind of works you're creating?
So, I mean, I think for me, when I make it, it's kind of driven by an urgency to create in some sense. And as I mentioned, when I was in university, I think I was also back then trying to articulate some concerns mostly for myself. And I was trying to like deal with issues of safety and harassment and all of that. And I think that sort of trickled into my work at that point of time. And of course, since then things have evolved. Like, like my practice has evolved. My approach to art making has also evolved. And I do still feel like the way I locate myself through my practice is very much as a woman. And of late, I have been feeling more aware of different aspects of my, identity in context to say even the political climate. And then I think that, the last year has been also very different in some sense. So I think presently it's not like I have dislocated from where I was standing a few years ago, but I think I've also come to be more aware of different aspects of my identity. My earlier work, of course, like I told you, it was driven by something very specific, and it was also, I think, something, it was not just me, but it was also, I think, at that point there were a lot of things happening because of which a lot of women around me were feeling, anger and grief and rage. And in the midst of all that I was dealing with on my own, there was also what happened in Delhi in 2012, December, with Jyoti Singh. So there were like a lot of things that informed. And, since then, of course, like I still locate myself in a similar way. But I guess the more you work and the more you think about your work and the more you understand about yourself, the more you sort of, start being aware of other aspects of your identity as well.
So, I mean, I think Giulia and Feroze already touched upon it, but do you think the labels of, like, let's say, feminist art or more women creating art that stands up for women's rights, do you think that's kind of being pushed a little bit and held on to, or do you think there's a bigger contribution it's making towards just women creating? And I think everything that Giulia and Feroze also mentioned, like how is that impacting things?
So I mean, one is that, of course, I guess I don't appreciate the label woman artist, and I guess if you are a feminist, that lens will definitely reflect in your work. But generally, I mean, my point, perspective on this is that there is a potential to have more women voices in the art world, either exhibiting or, participating in creating arts and culture spaces. It's just that there is some work that we need to do. There's a lot of work that we need to do in making these spaces, safer and healthier and more accessible. Right now, I also feel like, including me, like women who are sort of making inroads, it is also informed by a certain amount of privilege. The same power structures that hold some people back are the same power structures that and the privilege that have allowed some women to sort of make these inroads. So there, in that sense, there is a lot of work. It's not enough to have labels such as women artists and all women shows and all of that. There is a lot of on-ground work that needs to be done. There's a community that needs to be built and strengthened.
Right. So, Feroze, I mean, are there any, let's say, art funds or programs or initiatives that are either happening or that are kind of in the stages of policy making that are dedicated towards encouraging more women and, I guess, even society to change the way they think and allow for that to happen, to change the perception that women can create, and not just as a thing on the side, but as a profession that has an ecosystem around it?
I think art is talent. I don't think you can say it's like being a doctor or an engineer. Of course, those require talent too, but those can be learned, right? You can say, I want to be a doctor, I want to be an engineer. I think an artist, a great athlete, a great dancer, a great voice, these are God-given gifts in a sense. They're talents, right? So they make it these people who create art and become artists in any, not just the binary language of craft and, art as in canvas and sculpture, but genuinely the artist is God-given. I mean, it's a God-given gift. So I think yes, of course, we are building platforms. We give a lot of support to the artists. We do not, unfortunately or fortunately, actually discriminate against the male, for example, and say, oh, we're going to support female artists. That's not how I see it. So I think something that Giulia said earlier also is that I don't like being, yes, I'm using your platform today because I think it's Women's Day. I think it's important to have women's voices. A lot of what Faiza said is it's important to have women voices out there. But this constant labeling of putting us into these little categories doesn't really work. I think we have certain strengths and I think we have certain weaknesses. But to me, an artist is simply an artist. It's like saying, are you a good actor or not a good actor. I don't say, it's not really about actresses and actors. It's just, are you a good actor, right? So I think a lot of that boils down to, again, platform for the young. And like Faiza said, better, kind of stronger platforms for the young. So we ran a program called Prac Forum a few years ago, very successfully. And that was really a practical forum for people in the arts. And it was as simple as, how do you hang a painting? How do you write an artist note? How do you apply for a grant? What is the difference between a grant, a fellowship, and getting a bit of project money? What is the difference? How do you write for prizes? How do you, get insurance? I don't know. But nobody teaches you these things. And I think the great fault does lie somewhere along our education line and, acceptance of just art, particularly in India now, because we're still at a decorative stage. It's very hard for someone to say this painting is worth 1 lakh rupees and this is worth 5,000 rupees, right? What is the difference? Now, in the West, people don't realize, especially in India yet, what is the difference between this painting and that? And at the end of the day, both are done on the same, $500 canvas, right? It's the reputation of the person behind it. And that is the artist. Now, it's very easy to say, oh, give more place to women artists. Is that art good enough, right? Is it really quality work? And therein lies the question. So for someone like us, we're just giving an opportunity to young artists, new voices, new talent, and we've come to a point where we can hopefully spot it. Yes, we work with a lot of young women artists. It's not because they're women. It's just that we love their work, right? It's a new voice. So for us, it's more like the young. To me, the youth is very important to encourage, not to let them fall off the artist wagon and become computer scientists or, computer engineers somewhere, or not be an artist and become a housewife, or not be a singer and become something else, or not become a great dancer. So it's really to encourage that level. But I don't think we really, because I seriously see art as a talent. It's to me a great talent, and you are blessed with it. So we look for the talent. I don't really look for women artists or not. I look for young talent.
Yeah, if I can add, Sahil, so many times, we had, comments, quite rude at times also. And I thought, about myself, oh my God, should I take care more of that aspect, right? Of why you don't invite enough women in your festivals. First of all, to be honest, we always try to be open. And that means, because we treat ourselves as a platform for dialogue, and the dialogue needs to present different voices. And we really nurture a lot young artists as well. But I think that this relates once again to the general thing. Also when Amanda Gorman, has been called by Biden, I think that this is something that is not really, it's something that defeats the whole purpose, because actually she's a very cute, nice girl, but she's not a great Black poet, and or women poet. So are you doing any service, in just calling a woman and also Black, to your public speech? Because yeah, that's the minority that must be represented. But are we talking poetry, or are we talking minorities? So let's not confuse the matters. If we talk minority, we talk minority. If we talk art, we talk art. And then it must be good art, because otherwise you really pay a disservice to the minority as well. I actually kind of suggesting also that, see, it's a woman, not that good. Basically, it's even worse. You activate an even worse sort of cycle. And on the other side, grants for women artists, great. But again, and this is going to take a long journey also in the West. The problem is not having a grant to make art. The problem is having a structure of support that in your daily life is institutionally taken care of, with kindergartens, help at home, etc., because I can also have a wonderful grant, but then, as Feroze remarked multiple times, if I don't have a support system at home, what do I make with that grant? I make one sculpture, and then what? And then what is my path moving on, right? So I think that in that sense, just the North European countries are quite unique because, for instance, like during the maternity, the husband and the wife can take leave from their respective companies for how much they want. So the husband can also take 6 months leaves, and the mother, like, can go back to work. And these, over the years, of course, made this system to be absolutely flexible, also in the perception of the men. Because again, I think that also one of the mistakes that we may do is that when we talk women empowerment, we never actually sort of leave the men speaking within those discourses. And we need to act both sides. We need to act on us as a community, but also like speaking with the other side, because you can't speak like amongst, like just like the same voices. You need actually to tap into the system, which is the men usually. So I think that also these discourses should become more fluid to a certain extent.
So I think we have 15 minutes left, so I'm going to just jump to the audience questions. Asad, is Professor Mitter joining again? I wasn't sure.
He's already joined, Sahil.
Oh, all
and you
right,
have
sorry.
15 questions and 15 minutes. So this is like a
Yeah,
rapid fire.
it's a rapid fire round. Okay, so yeah, we have a bunch of questions, but yeah, I'm going to start with, can you each tell us about your own inspirations in the field? Women artists, gallerists, or patrons that you have admired?
Which one of us?
You can go first, Feroze.
Um,
It's for everyone, sorry.
so very quickly, for me, I would say that I'm by nature a doer, and India has so much need for the doer that I tend to, I'm that NRI kid who's always been fascinated by India, and I look at it as a great opportunity, but I also look at it as a great, big, dark, deep well of needs. So for me, it's really creating unusual ways to actually help the artist community. And I think coming from an artist family, we've seen this up close. We've seen, if I don't know if, how many of you know, but Satish, my father-in-law, Satish Gujral, he just passed away. But he had a very difficult childhood and a very as a disabled child, plus coming through the partition, plus coming to New India and struggling with a language he didn't know and a system. And he got sidelined over time for various reasons, but his art was the only thing that he could truly use as an expression. That was truly him. And a very difficult and unusual life he led. And that led us to saying that we want to do some giving back, and what do we do with it? And we pick the arts. And having done that, I feel for me, it's really a place to create opportunities where people don't usually get opportunity. But it's also a place to carry on the legendary work of building a legacy, but also of allowing Indian contemporary to find a voice. People forget that contemporary Indian art is tomorrow's modern and day after's ancient. And art marks time. We wouldn't know what India was or what who the Egyptians were, or who the Incas were, if we didn't have art. So for me, it's a very, very important, precious thing, is to safeguard, augment, build platforms, give people an opportunity to create our contemporary world today so that it can be tomorrow's modern and day after's antiquities or ancient art. And I just feel a desperate need to do that. I feel like there's very little government support doing that. And it's key that individuals all over India do this. So for me, that's the real sort of key to building it. Unfortunately, there are no great examples. They're all from the West, and India doesn't do things like the West. So I don't want to pick something from the West. I think we have to forge our own way. And, we don't evolve, we just leapfrog. So we're going to leapfrog. We don't have great museums. We don't have a single contemporary art museum in India other than the private collection of Kiran Nadar. So we just have to leapfrog. We're going to do something different. And those are the projects we are building. We've got an extraordinary line of projects coming up, and we're building them to leapfrog over these kind of gaps.
Giulia, Faiza, inspirations for y'all, women doing great things in today's landscape?
Today's landscape, or I mean, like,
let's say historically as well, I guess.
I mean, I don't know, like, because to be honest, like, I have way too many. And again, I would not like to refer just like to women. There have been also like men doing fantastic things for women, for instance. So just so to say, but no, like, I mean, for me, like, of course, like if we have to relate to the art side, like now jokes aside, I love the work of Jenny Holzer. I love, I mean, the work of Kara Walker. I mean, I love like some architects also, like, you know, like, I mean, Sumi, that is like she just won, she's from South Africa. She just won the Serpentine Gallery Prize, like to make the new pavilion. I mean, there's so many, that's the thing. And I think that we are blessed because we do research, I think, like, I mean, all of us, and we really are getting exposed to so many amazing examples, actually, of great quality, great sort of like intention, and great like revolutionary power. And art has always played that role in society, has always been the spirit of the time, but also like, you know, the sort of, you know, push for a change. So I think that we are so lucky to, I would mention too many. That's my problem, really too many. And lucky enough actually to know some and research on many.
Sorry, Sahil, can I interject for a minute?
Yeah.
I would like to say I don't have names like that, but I would like to say I would like to see like formats done elsewhere. Like I would love a great arts council, like the British Arts Council. I would love. I've been on a number of international boards of museums, great institutions. I would love to have those kind of boards at institutions. You know, Mohit, my husband, and me have fought long and hard for CCR, which is corporate culture responsibility. We work constantly to change policy. We work on, like Giulia said, taxation. We also work on access. You know, India has no access. We also work on how do we build archiving for our museums? How do we build better access for us to go in? Every institution is blocked. So how do we open these spaces up to people? So a lot of our work is also on antiquity laws, on taxation laws, and being able to give philanthropic money to institutions. There is no format in India to actually give your money to a national institution. There's no format to leave collections to national institutions. Some do, very few, but it's not easy. None of it is easy. So a lot of our work is also the back end to change institutional formats so we can all have better access. So I would say I do look at the West for those kind of institutional best practices. Yes.
Faiza, any inspiring women for you?
I would say a lot. I mean, it's really hard to name a full list, but I would definitely at this point want to also acknowledge my professors in university, Dr. Kirtana Tangavelu, Dr. Sharda Natarajan, Dr. Sita Reddy, and many others, my colleagues, my, artists, friends. And because I know these women in their own quiet ways have been doing so much to, allow other women to get in and have opportunities and have access, because I think they understand that it's hard enough to be a woman with, pressures at home and in society, and then just to make it to art school and just to dream of a full-time career in art, So, I mean, these are the women I would, definitely like to acknowledge.
Well said, Faiza.
No, definitely. So I'm just scanning through the audience Q&A to see one that I think I would like to hear Professor Mitter's one on. But Mr. Mitter, I actually had a question earlier, and it's kind of going to touch upon something you mentioned in your speech. But in the history of India, obviously, I think one of the biggest moments was independence and partition. I'd love to hear your views on just how the trajectory for women in the arts have kind of been different in the two countries since then. Do you see a difference in policy, socioeconomic structures, and subsequently the kind of art and work that's been happening with women artists in India and Pakistan?
Oh, okay. Quickly. Now, the thing is, how much time have I got? I have a few questions of all the speakers. Okay. Pakistan and India developed differently. And let me say that both young countries, with certainly with India, very long tradition. So the thing with India, I would say, and to some extent Pakistan, of course, South Asia, is that patronage was very religious. It related to certain things, but there was no real secular patronage. And, early 50s, with Pandit Nehru, the whole independent India, institutional patronage was introduced. Lalit Kala was one of them. So that was seen as a good thing. The main problem, and I might also take up a little bit Feroze's points. I mean, the whole problem of patronage is double-edged. In India, you have, as all of you, I think, Giulia, particularly, and Feroze, you've said that there is bureaucracy. And in a way, kind of this kind of state patronage and this kind of much more controlled patronage is very detrimental, as I understand it. So in the early period, in fact, there wasn't much patronage. In India and Pakistan, as far as I can tell, there was very little. That's another interesting, complicated question, because women artists were always discouraged. I have a very personal experience of one of the artists. She's very good, and because she's very radical, she applied for Fulbright, I think. And this is amazing. Number of times I wrote for her, and so they took it seriously. But every time they kind of called her for an interview, Lahore to Karachi, that morning, how could she get to Karachi from Lahore? When she just learned at 9 in the morning. After 3 or 4 times, then there was some protests, including mine. Then they allowed her to apply, and then they, I think, must have influenced the decision of Fulbright. She never got it. So there is a problem with that kind of patronage. In India, there wasn't much active patronage. But here's something I would like to mention. I mean, going back to British patronage, Arts Council is interesting, but they have, at least until now, very little actual control. This is the great problem with double edge. Do you, provide support as well as say, well, this is what you have to do? India being a young country, there is that danger. In Britain, it doesn't matter because they're not interested, but they will give money. Other thing is that I think it's been raised, semi-public kind of patronage. How do great collections get, donated? In India, there isn't anything. I'm afraid I have to say, being an Indian, we Indians don't like to give unless it's on a very specific thing. But in America, this is one of the things. You make a lot of money, whatever you like, but you then give away, the great collection of, number of them, including National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., largely based on private donation, Mellon Foundation. So this is the question I want you to think. Also, how do we negotiate this problem of patronage, Sahil, And so both Pakistan and India, growing country, there are a lot of issues. And one thing has changed, though. Actual semi-public, you might say public patronage, I mean, liberalization and the whole kind of new art scene from the 90s, I would say 1890s, that has led to a lot of, certainly money coming in. I mean, art galleries, you have to think of as patronage, and so on. So that's an interesting development, which has a lot of implications for, next kind of development. Can I just complete with a few more comments? Gender is a very interesting issue all of you have raised, as well as, well, let's think about it. A lot of minorities, gender, race or religion or any other kind. So that is an interesting issue. And Faiza has rightly commented on the fact of identity. that has become a very contentious issue all over the world, particularly in India. The other thing is violence with women artists, women patronage. I mean, violence is a real factor, and that again one needs to think about. So, do we have? We must have safe spaces, of course, but do we have completely women artists? Women patrons, supporting women artists? Of course not. I mean, Feroze, you'd agree, Feroze, that I suppose you must have a lot of different artists and everywhere else. So all the big galleries are gender neutral. I think the main problem is women have had such a lot of disadvantage. So that way there's certain extra, kind of representation is needed. Women need to have more voice, and that's important. But there's also the danger, I must say, that if you can't make it too gender specific, women's space, and that does create problems because it ghettoizes. Then men would say, "Oh, yes, wonderful. Let's have women artists." This is what happens with a lot of minorities in the West. They're kind of categorized, and these are the kind of diaspora artists and so on. So that we need to think about. It's always kind of, it's not all or nothing. It's a matter of give and take. The other interesting point is that women have always had double burden. So, they had to be, and they had to look after children, be at home, as well as be artists. Some of the outstanding women artists didn't have any children. It just might be an accident. Meena Mukherjee, for instance, and so on. But this is an issue which is very important. But as Giulia has said, in the West, it's all changing. Men are sharing a lot. I see this younger generation of men and women, husbands take equal share. And so that's a great development. I hope it happens. Ultimately, you must think of value. It's not just having, this is a woman artist, therefore we must support her. Also, you have to think of quality and value. Thank you.
Thank you. Sahil, any closing remarks from the panel or yourself?
No, I think we're good. I think Professor Mitter ends things on a fine note. But thank you, Giulia, Faiza, Feroze, for a great conversation. I'll leave it to Asad from here.
Ironically, I got my Concern India catalog today, and I was writing notes profusely through this panel on all this interesting things you all were saying. And the title of the panel was I was not meant to take two steps back. It was meant to honor, applaud, and pay an homage to women in the field of the arts. And Giulia, you spoke about maternity leave. I took two weeks paternity leave when my daughter was born.
Amazing.
I was a little cuckoo in India. I mean, in the US, you took 2 weeks. You got 2 weeks by default. And people tell me, why would you take that? And I said, I need it. But anyway, lots has changed. I made lots of notes. I don't think we have time. We have about 20 questions that are unanswered. So I will just take this opportunity to thank this wonderful panel for the wonderful insights, and also to Professor Mitter and to Sahil for joining in and supporting this. And I have a whole normal thank you note which I prepare, which I don't have time for. But at Avid we push the envelope as much as we can, and just stay tuned to what we do. Stalk us on social media, follow us on our website, and until next time, stay safe, stay happy, and just remember that learning never stops. Thank you very much, everyone, for your contributions.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.